What is the worst season of a good show? I loved season 4 and most of 5. But when they tried to throw in relationship drama between Castle and Beckett out of nowhere at the end of season 5, I got so mad. Just let them have a normal, happy relationship and bring in drama elsewhere. It was totally unbelievable after all the work they had both put into the relationship for them not to communicate their issues. And then we didn't even get a happy wedding episode because they added that stupid plot about Castle getting kidnapped. So dumb. Season 9 of The X-Files. Fox execs were greedy and wanted to milk that cow till the last drop. They had no show to replace that would have similar ratings, if what I've read is correct. From what I've read, even Gillian Anderson was ready to move on. I still can't believe it. The X-Files without Mulder. Personally, I like season 8 because he was still in it half the season and they wrote around Dee Dee's absence. And the S8 ending was more than satisfactory. But no Mulder all season? What were they thinking? Hyde and Jackie are horrible to each other and both act like it was a mistake that they ever dated. And then she hooks up with Fez. It's like they were trying to offend Jackie/Hyde fans as much as possible. To me, this was the worst thing about season 8, not Randy. Randy sucks, but he was almost entirely left out of the finale, and he doesn't retroactively ruin earlier seasons. But how season 8 treats Jackie and Hyde ruins their relationship, because you know how it will end. That always bothered me about the show. Jackie and Donna were both interesting characters who, more often than not, defined their stories by constant relationship drama and changing boyfriends rather than their own problems, goals, etc. like the boys, for the most part. While you could say that it's accurate to the 1970s, I never enjoyed that. Donna I could forgive, because while she's a great character there was never that much potential in her solo stories, but Jackie had loads of wasted potential, especially with how good an actress she had. They were the best written and most watchable couple IMO. Drama has to come from somewhere in a sitcom between a couple and usually it's for one character to act kinda shitty to another character and then learn a lesson. For characters like Donna and Eric, who are already supposed to be good people, they had to stoop to get to that level and then learn a lesson and return to where they were. But since Jackie and Hyde weren't really great people, the shitty things they did felt more like how they generally were, and then when they learned their lesson, it felt like them growing as people. Over time they genuinely became better people for it, but you can't say the same for any other relationship in the show. Worst part is the cast departures. It just felt like the series was treading water but having characters leave, but it even worse because the remaining ones are stuck in this what the fuck am I still doing here place for a whole season. They actually had a good replacement lined up for Eric, Charlie, who appeared at the end of season 7. He was kind of a do-gooder kid who audiences quite liked. Unfortunately before S8 happened the actor got the lead role in some other show so he dropped out of S8, and they then replaced him with Randy who everybody absolutely hated. Somewhere in between there Ashton Kutcher realized it was time to leave too and they gave Tommy Chong a bigger role to fill his space. And I like Tommy Chong, but his character was never meant to get that much screen time. That 70s show had to deal with the sliding timescale and the fact that they decided to just not keep them in high school the entire time. Once they graduate the writers had to come up with ways to justify all of them still being together, which wasn't all that great and really wearing thin, cast departures aside, by the time they reached the last 2 seasons. Edit. Also speaking of cast departures, Randy did not inject any freshness into the show as his character was essentially a fusion of Eric and Kelso to compensate for the leaving of Kutcher and Grace. I have weird feelings about Once Upon a Time. I enjoyed it. It was a bit campy but generally fun if you didn't overanalyze it. However, they dragged out the familial relations to the point where someone shows and the immediate thought is I wonder who they are related to. And there were a lot of concerning storylines that were kind of glossed over, the conception of Robin Hood's daughter for example. And the alternate reality characters was just weird. This might not make much sense, but every season of Thomas the Tank Engine after season 7 became the generic kids show with no substance, and as you can see later this year's it's more evident than ever. It's a disgrace to Mr. Autry and everyone in charge of the original show who made something way bigger than a generic kids show. It had such great lessons, funny moments, serious moments, scary moments, great narration from Ringo Starr, George Carlin, Alec Baldwin, and Michael Angelis, fantastic music, great model trains, and sets. Everything was so great even adults enjoy it, but not the new stuff. Once Hit bought the show, it became a baby lesson show with terrible narration, horrible lessons, lame stories and sets, bland music, and then it got the CGI treatment. No more models mean no more actual life in the show. Many say the Brenner era from I think season 15 to 22 was great, but I can't agree. No matter who comes in and writes good material now, Mattel has further butchered the show and it's making such little money now even kids don't enjoy it. I wish Brit never sold those rights to Hit, that was the start of the end. Edit, you fans are passionate just like me. I'm very happy that I could either change opinions, restore love, or remind people why they love Thomas. Thank you so much for the last 8 hours of great comments and awards. Edit 2. This is and will forever be my highest upvoted comment on Reddit. I love you all who were so sweet. My son, who is 14 now, was quite possibly the biggest Thomas the Tank Engine fan. It wasn't just a show or toy to him, it was a lifestyle for about 7 years. He refused to watch or play with anything else, except Wally, and had Thomas parties and wore Thomas clothing. He would 100% agree with you. In fact, I am going to show him your comment. He has a 2-year-old little brother and he refuses to allow him to watch the newer shows which he calls trash. It's old school Thomas or nothing. Edit. Thank you for all the kind words, award, and sharing your cool Thomas stories. My son read all of the comments and thinks this is cool. He liked Thomas for a lot longer than most the kids in his school, and there were several times when he was made fun of for liking what the other kids described as baby toys. But he never wavered. I remember in first grade the other kids would be playing Beyblades and he would have his pocket full of trains and zero apologies for liking what he liked. The earlier seasons were greatly inspired by the writers, and Hillenburg himself, having done Rocko's Modern Life, which had a ton of adult skewing jokes. SpongeBob remarks he didn't have a date to his own senior prom, also revealing Patrick took his own mom. Latter seasons drop most of these implications that SpongeBob is technically an adult, in favor going absolutely nuts with his childlike naivete. Same applies to Squidward's pompousness, Patrick's stupidity, Mr. Krabs' greed, and Sandy's intelligence. Man, I love old Patrick. He seemed like a simpleton and would make far-out remarks or solutions that sounded like nonsense, but always proved to be true and correct by the end of the episode. I love a character who seems simple-minded and dumb but is actually earthly, helpful, and knowledgeable in a lot of niche subjects. There's plenty of people like that in the real world, and I felt like it taught kids a lesson about not assuming someone's intelligence and capacity to help. Now he's just dumb for real. I really liked the show at first, but man did it get worse over time. The gross let's all fuck in the woods together part, the musical numbers that had me wanting to crawl out of my skin with cringe, the whole but my boy I friend bit, romanticizing suicide, the way they totally and laughably nerfed the fuck out of Lucifer. How every time someone was like, but seriously Sabrina don't do thing, it would have catastrophic consequences beyond your worst nightmare. And she'd be like, K, then immediately do thing for selfish, dumbass reasons. Like, I get the point, is she was just a teenager, but goddamn. UG. People love to trash the reboot, but Season 3 of Ben 10 Alien Force and Season 1 of Ben 10 Ultimate Alien were declines in quality. After having one of the best character development arcs between the original and beginning of AF, Ben 10 himself became as huge of a jerk as he used to be. He fucking mocked Kevin after he accidentally got mutated and can't change back, and Inoue ditched on his girlfriend just to watch a movie and spy on the Forever Knights. Other problems I had were Vilgax returning, which contradicts the defeat he had at the end of the original series, and killing off Chroma Stone, who is one of my favorite aliens in that show. Gwen and Kevin were well-written characters in that season, but that fucking brat Ben Tennyson with that attitude ruined it for me. He was done dirty by the writers. I'm currently watching The Vampire Diaries. It's not a masterpiece by any stretch, but entertaining enough. Anyway, I'm up to season 7 and I'm thinking Elena hasn't been around for a while. I get she's in a magical coma or whatever, but it's kinda weird she's not woke up yet. Googled it because it was bugging me. The actress quit the show. So I'd say season 7 of The Vampire Diaries, because of whiny Damon. Julian is a bit shit, not at all formidable. Stefan has all but abandoned Caroline, but at least Alaric is still an alcoholic. I will eventually finish it, but even from season 1 I just ended up laughing at some parts, especially the logic of the characters sometimes. Example, Elena finds out Stefan and Damon are vampires, accepts it as truth, and she thinks, let me go confront him about this. Why didn't he tell me? Shows up at their door and demands Stefan confirm her findings. He does. Cue her screaming in terror, telling him to get away from her even though she was the one who went there in the first place, already knowing what they were. Season 2 of Altered Carbon. The first season was incredible. It didn't shy away from showing literally everything to convey the brutality of that world. This made any sequence or interaction feel much more mature and gritty. The story was unique and interesting, felt fresh. Overall, I loved that first season and will watch it again. Season 2 completely threw that formula out the window. It basically got turned into a borderline PG-13 generic sci-fi action show. It shied away from every element that made the first season so interesting. Instead, this made season 2 feel a bit generic and uninteresting. Not only that, but I felt the world building was much worse. The locations were a bit generic and bland looking. Lacked the same kind of detail and life from the first season. It lacked character. It was like they just took the minimum core elements from season 1 and just boiled it down to a handful of simple locations and designs. All that, along with a much more toned down maturity level, made the action sequences seem tame and cleaned up. A big aspect to season 1 was they just showed all the violence, all the sex, so that you really understood the seriousness of that world. You were shown exactly the kind of people occupy that universe, and how fucked up things can get. Season 2 cleaned all that up and threw it away. Seriously, Altered Carbon was one of the largest disappointments of my entire TV watching life, because season 1 was so enthralling and had such depth, but season 2 was immediately such obvious crap. I was stoked when they announced Anthony Mackie, cause he had just come off several massive movies, but he didn't portray Takeshi well at all. Didn't have the same swagger as either of season 1's actors, nor the badassery. And, small gripe, maybe I'm a weirdo for noticing this and being so particular about it, Mackie walked really fucking weird. I just could not believe that Mackie was the same Takeshi as Kinnaman and Lee. SpongeBob SquarePants Season 4, if I recall correctly, after Season 3 and the movie, that's when the series was meant to end. But the show was doing so well that Nickelodeon pressured them to keep making episodes. I'm not sure what happened with the team behind the show, but I think, emphasis on think, that Steven Hillenburg and a bunch of other writers might have stepped down at some point. So other people else took their places, and after that, there were noticeable bad changes in the characters' personalities. SpongeBob going from a positive adult who always looks on the bright side of things to a complete man-child. Patrick going from SpongeBob's best friend who acts dumb at times to a fucking dumbass who's a bitch at times. Squidward going from guy SpongeBob and Patrick Annoy who just wants to be left alone to fucking depressed. Mr. Krabs going from a greedy boss to a fucking piece of shit who fucking drove Plankton to suicide. Yeah. I think for me that's when the series started declining. If anyone in the replies can tell me what really happened, that'd be nice. Game of Thrones, Season 8. Obvious answer. Clone Wars, Season 1. Not terrible, but they were still finding out what works and what doesn't. Can be forgiven. South Park, Season 20. Essentially S20, Gerald. The whole skank hunt arc dragged on for way too long and it just wasn't that funny. They did a similar thing in S19 with PC Principle, but I feel like it wasn't as bad as 20. Walking Dead, Season 7, but S8 was bad as well. You'd have one good episode at the start and end and maybe one in the middle if you were lucky, and the rest was just boring filler. Thankfully it got better with S9 and 10, but it is dragging on a bit now. Orange is the New Black from around mid-season 4 onwards. They just stretched it out well beyond its natural shelf life, and it suffered massively for it. IIRC, the riot/inmate prison takeover, only lasts about 4 days in real time, but they made it last for the whole season. Then after that it got more and more fantastical, including a surreal musical song and dance number to open the next season, I think. That turned out to be only in the imagination of one of the characters, but I remember exclaiming out loud, "Oh come on." Then even the eventual S7 ending fell flat, and I was all pretty depressing. I know it was a show about prison, so wasn't going to be a bundle of laughs, but I at least hoped for some character redemption. Instead, there was an odd resolution for Piper in which she follows Alex and gives up her life/potential career to be with her. One character gets dementia, another is deported, leaving her besotted boyfriend fruitlessly awaiting her release while holding a bunch of flowers, not knowing she'll never be coming back. That broke my heart. Another dies, another is condemned to life imprisonment after being falsely accused of another crime, ending her promising potential had she been released. When she should have been. Grr, I'm getting re-annoyed just remembering all the ways they messed it up. All for, presumably, more money, given that 7 seasons should really have been 2 or 3. The ending, on paper, is an interesting subversion. Ted's always been set up as a hopeless romantic who believes in love at first sight and the idea of the happily ever after. So making the end of the story be a more down-to-earth and realistic affair which doesn't end happily ever after is at least surprising. The problem is that the series spent several seasons proving that Ted and Robin just doesn't work, and then setting up Barney and Robin as workable, only to undo it in the last 15 minutes, damaging Barney's character arc through the run of the show. In addition, they really managed a miracle in finding someone to fill in the role of the mother, and people managed to get very attached to her in spite of how little screen time she gets, leaving it extremely unsatisfying to learn the writers kill her off just to justify an ending they wrote at the start of season 2 which no longer works with all the character development that followed it. In addition, they really managed a miracle in finding someone to fill in the role of the mother, and people managed to get very attached to her in spite of how little screen time she gets. I think this is the main reason why the ending doesn't work and people get so angry about it. It felt like the person Ted describes is either not a real person, so just how he remembers her in a very exaggerated way, or a very boring annoying character like Ted. After about season 3 or 4 Noon really wants to met this chick, eventually you accept it's just a tool to make Ted retell his life. Then she appears and not only is she everything he said but also likable and her own character, which I never expected. Now that you like her, you need time to grieve for her and 10 minutes is not enough. Yet it would have been good. I remember seeing a promo for the last season where they actually did that exact thing. It was a shot of the kids on the couch but with the actors at their current age complaining about how it feels like it's been years and they're going insane. If I remember correctly, the son said he was feeling things for / looking at his sister weirdly because they'd been alone on the couch together for so long. If I had it my way it would have been an aged up mom coming up behind the fully grown kids, really just to show the passage of time and for convenience's sake, as Ted says, and that kids, is How I Met Your Mother, with the mom then saying something like, "Oh, I love this story, tell it again," and the kids just yell no, then credits. I think the bigger issue is the way they just casually murder so much character development in the very last episode almost as an afterthought. We see Barney go through such a fantastically done personality change over 9 fucking seasons, where he learns to not be a shithead playboy and seems to have finally found someone he legitimately cares about who makes him want to be a better person. You then spend the entire final season on his wedding, which apparently I am one of the few who still mostly liked the last season and was okay with it just taking place over the wedding weekend, only to go lol jk they divorcing now and Barney is going back to being a simple-minded playboy in the last half hour of the fucking show. It is amazing to me that they thought that was a good idea.